Economics professor from Columbia University, Joseph Stiglitz, once said, "It is trust more than money that makes the world go round." Now, while this has perhaps always been true, it is more true today than ever. I was recently having lunch with a country manager of a large dental supply business. Now, being an industry that I don't know a great deal about, I was eager to understand what are the trends, what are the changes happening in his neck of the corporate woods. What he said was interesting. He said the biggest challenge we're facing today is the fact that we cannot get away with anything anymore. He said even the simplest mistakes are seen as unacceptable. In the past, he said, sometimes we'd send a shipment of supplies to a dental practice that may have had minor damage to the packaging, or perhaps he said our warehouse would make the mistake of distributing products that had a shorter shelf life than the standard 2 years. He said now, if our warehouse team dare to make these mistakes, he said our customers are straight on to the professional forum groups, giving it to us both guns blazing. And he said, that's just the beginning. He said, dentists today are constantly haggling on price. He said, they're always comparing the price that a rep gave them with the price that maybe another dentist or dental practice was given by another rep, or perhaps someone operating in a different market. He said, it's making life incredibly difficult. Now, reflecting on the challenges that dental supplier described that day, I realized that in reality, he is far from alone. Now, while there was once, I guess, a base assumption of good faith, of cordiality, of confidentiality in most client interactions, those days are well and truly over. Today, there are 3 reasons really that trust is getting harder to gain, but is also more valuable than ever. The first reason is that today we are in the age of skepticism, and I suspect we've all sensed that. Consumers today are more wary of placing their confidence in organisations than ever, and there's, I guess, good reason for this. I mean, just consider in recent years the litany of ethical missteps and moral failures that have dominated the news cycle. Consider, Tesco selling horse meat dressed up as beef, or then you've got Volkswagen with the Dieselgate debacle, which is one that marred their brand enormously. Then you've got the Cambridge Analytica Facebook fiasco, something that's massively eroded our trust in the social media giant. Or then you've got Boeing's fatally flawed jets, or what about revelations of widespread abuse and institutional cover-ups by Catholic priests, bishops, and other authority figures in care institutions? Then you've got revelations of deception and corruption at even the highest levels of banks and financial institutions. The skepticism, it's a result of these various missteps. It's so clear when you look at the numbers. For over 2 decades, the team at Edelman Research, for instance, have quizzed more than 30,000 people each year across 28 different countries to assess just what their levels of trust are in various institutions. And the results in recent years have been very interesting. According to Edelman's most recent research, today just 42% of us, the general public, trust the media, for instance. 37% trust CEOs, and less than a third trust the government to do what is right. Now, interestingly, these figures represent a drop of up to 14% in the space of 3 years. Now, this is a decline that is unprecedented in the absence of natural or economic catastrophe. The second factor, by the way, that's eroding our trust is that we're also in the age of transparency. In this age of transparency, it is not just things like price comparability or product safety that counts. Consumers today expect and demand openness at every point of interaction with a brand. I discovered this working with a large tyre retailer recently. He suggested or said that over the years, someone would come into a tyre store, they'd give the make and the model of their vehicle, the person behind the counter would type in the vehicle's make and number, give a quote for tyres, and that would be it. The customer accepted that price. He said today that's not the case. The customer was increasingly over the last few years wanting to come behind the counter, just double check you're putting the right details in, that you're actually giving them the best price possible. And he said this has put massive pressure on store people in the chain. Now, explaining why building trust in the age of transparency is so challenging, Rachel Botsman, in her excellent book, Who Can You Trust?, suggests that the very notion of putting our faith in institutions and those at their helm is becoming increasingly untenable in the 21st century. Today, she said, there is simply nowhere to hide. As Botsman observes, the realities of this age of transparency mean that the rules of the past no longer apply. Suppression, secrecy, and subterfuge simply do not work anymore. Now, the third factor eroding our trust is that we are in the age of empowerment. Individuals today have access to information and an array of options and a platform for making their voice heard in ways that previous generations could have only dreamed of. These tools of empowerment cannot be underestimated by leaders and organisations aiming to build the trust of their marketplace in the years ahead. I mean, consider the power of a consumer voice and how that changes the brand customer power dynamic. I mean, there was once a time when an individual's voice only travelled so far. You know, if you had a bad experience with a company or a brand, you might have told your family or your friends who might have in turn shared it with theirs, but that's sort of where it stopped. If you were really incensed, you might have written a letter to the editor of a local newspaper or organised a boycott or even contacted the government department concerned with consumer protection, but that's as much as you could really do. At the end of the day, the power of a consumer's voice was pretty limited or dwarfed by the clout and the reach of a company's marketing budget. And yet today, online review sites and social media have thoroughly turned the tables. 90% of consumers trust peer reviews, for instance, today, while only 14% trust advertisements. In other words, what you say about yourself and your products matters less than it ever has before. In contrast, what your customers say about you speaks volumes. Taking customers for granted and restricting options or information will never work like it once did. Further still, a good reputation may take years to build, but only minutes or perhaps today even seconds to lose. So you must be on your best behaviour at all times and constantly keep the consumer's needs and desires front and centre. Now in truth, shouldn't that be what we've been doing as businesses and brands all along? In this age of empowerment, transparency and scepticism, building trust may well be more difficult than ever, but it's also more important. According to a recent Trends Customer Trust report released by Salesforce Research, 95% of customers are more likely to be loyal to a company they trust, while 92% are more likely to purchase additional products and services from trusted businesses. In the words of social entrepreneur and author Bryant McGill, when trust is lost, everything is lost. I firmly believe that the opposite is also true. When trust is gained, everything is gained.